Hi, I'm Vanessa Friedman, and I'm the fashion director of the New York Times, and I am thrilled to be here with you guys talking to the CEOs of both London Fashion Week and Copenhagen Fashion Week, Caroline Rush and Cecilie Thorsmark, because we are going to discuss something that has been really, I think, a pressing issue over the last 16 months, in particular as fashion weeks have really been virtual, which is, what does this mean for climate change and the future of Fashion Week and sustainability, and where is it all going? Because obviously, Cecilie and Caroline, Fashion Week has, as it's been in the past, with thousands of people descending on each of your cities, via airplane, and then taking black cars all over the place, and using up lots of air conditioning and lighting, electricity, and everything else that's involved in putting on a show. It has a huge environmental impact. So, how do you even begin to measure it? Can you measure it? And how do you think about it? Caroline, do you want to start?
Absolutely. Well, for us in the past and for many years, actually, we've looked at what we can do as an organisation in terms of trying to reduce waste, looking at reusables. For the exhibition part of Fashion Week, we've been working with a company called Pop to help with rentals so that we're not sort of creating and reusing furniture. And of course, energy plays a big part. So thinking about the generators and using green power where possible. But of course, now there are tools that you can use that measure a much broader view of the event. So as we move forward, we're going to start using a tool come September. We wanted to get to the point where we had actually a physical fashion week. We didn't want to give ourselves a false sort of starting point, so that we can measure, really start to think about all of those issues that you're talking about around people traveling in, around traveling around the city, how that travel's happening, and that whole impact on our cities and on the environment. But of course, is that the benefit of Fashion Weeks is bringing businesses together so that hopefully that fashion audience aren't traveling constantly around the world, and that while they're here, that they're seeing as many businesses as possible in a concentrated area. So in terms of getting around the city, we really think about that travel. We work really closely with the designers and the PRs. Doesn't always work out to work from one venue to the next, so we're limiting the travel backwards and forwards. But we're really interested to take a view on what that benchmark looks like to start with, so we can start set ourselves some hard targets for reduction, but also, of course, think about working with the business that are participating within Fashion Weeks, which is why we're really interested in the work that Cecilie has done and looking at how we can adapt that for London.
Let's talk about brands for a second, because I think one of the interesting points that a lot of times people outside of fashion don't entirely understand is that even though both of your fashion councils organize Fashion Week and are sort of nominally in charge of it, you can't actually make brands behave in a certain way, right? You don't actually have enforcement power. You can advise and suggest and kind of model good behavior, but you can't make them do it, right? So how much, what has the response been, and how hard is it to actually get everyone on board with these different initiatives?
That's actually the approach that I took on from the very early beginning, and that was like my clear vision of how I wanted to reinvent our Fashion Week. And it was by saying that we are in a moment in history with an alarming climate emergency, where we can no longer just talk or spotlight the brands that do well. We actually have to require it. And I think our platform and our event is of such importance to the brands, and of such size that it actually does make a difference to demand minimum standards from the brands. So what we did, and of course we all along consulted with the industry, because this is a very radical way of changing how we do Fashion Week, and of course it's super important to have the industry on board. So we have a sustainability advisory board. We had a panel of experts as well, and consultancy agency also working with a lot of different brands, sustainability strategies. But what we did was that we felt that we should utilize this, enormous power that we do have in the fashion ecosystem to start demanding change and believing that, requirements are fundamental. So we are, as of 2023, we will introduce 18 minimum standards that brands must comply with in order to be able to participate in our fashion week. And it's 18 minimum standards that relate to conditions throughout the value chain. So it's from strategic direction to design, to material choices, consumer engagement, work conditions, and ultimately also the show, of course, because it is a fashion week. But 18 minimum standards that they must adhere to. Otherwise, we won't even look at their show application for Fashion Week. And besides the 18 minimum standards are an additional, I believe it's 54 action points, which are not mandatory, all of them. They're just, you can score points. So the more boxes you're able to tick off, the more points you score. And that is why we also will introduce a minimum point score. So that we're able to say, hey, anyone who can live up to the 18 minimum standards and score this minimum amount of points, they're not average. They are best in class in, perform. They have like super, the best sustainable or responsible business practices that they can have. And knowing that, that it's not like they can lag behind in one of the areas, say, working conditions. No, we don't do anything in working conditions, but our fabrics are super, innovative or sustainable, recycled, upcycled, whatever. They have to score points throughout, all areas. Okay. So,
Caroline, let me just move to Caroline. Caroline, are you doing the same kind of thing? Are you requiring the brands that want to be part of London to meet a standard? Can you?
So we've taken the work that Cecilie has done, actually, and we're mapping it against our Institute of Positive Fashion, so environment, people, craftsmanship and community, and the Sustainable Development Goals. And one of the things actually we think we can do quite quickly is the criteria for young businesses that apply for the grant. So we gave out, I think it was 1.5 million last year in terms of grants to businesses through, it was COVID response last year, but this year it will be New Gen and fashion funds, etc. That they start to meet that minimum requirement as part of the opportunity for grant funding, because there's no reason when you start out as a business that you can't set these as your principles for business. There will be time in transition for established businesses to move towards meeting that criteria. So we're looking to see how quickly we can do that. We would like to be able to do that for the intake for next year. And we're looking at that. We've got a working group looking at that at the moment, see how quickly we can implement it. And then in a similar way to Cecilie has done, is that we'll be able to then do consultations with industry to look at what's a reasonable time frame to get them to that point. Fantastic if we can meet 2023, the same as Cecilia. But I think because we're only starting that consultation, let's figure that out to make sure we don't want to leave it too long. We don't want to make it too easy, but it does need to be, because we want to make sure that we're taking businesses with us. And what it does flag then is that through our Institute of Positive Fashion is all the educational resources that we're looking at can actually help educate the businesses to get to that point, to be able to deliver to that. And they'll be able to, as Cecilia said, there's all of this sort of additional points you can get, is that those businesses are absolutely leading the way and nailing it in terms of, use of materials or supply chain innovation or transparency. They'll be able to self-declare the fact that they've gone way above the minimum standard. And I think that businesses that are operating in space are really keen for it, because there are no standards at the moment in which they're able to talk about where they are versus businesses that are quite often accused of greenwashing. So there's some really solid criteria for them to be able to get to, and they're then able to talk about what they do over and above the minimum. But as Cecilie was saying, the minimum isn't a low score. It's a really good place that businesses should be to operate responsibly.
When you talk about, these young businesses, these businesses that are starting out, that clearly kind of grew up with this idea that they should build into their systems responsible practices, really, like, what percentage of Fashion Week names are you talking about? Are you talking about 15%, 50%, 75%? I mean, it's not huge, right?
Well, if I think about of the businesses, so I think we've got about 40. Normally we'd have around 70 shows, but so for September we think we've got about 40 because we're in this transition period of people getting realigned and building back. Out of that, there are at least 10 businesses that are part of our talent support scheme, so 25%. Is that will drop a bit, I think, as we start to build, sort of rebuild back Fashion Week. So, but it's a significant, it's enough of a number to know if we have sort of 67 businesses as part of our talent support scheme. Some of them show at different periods in Fashion Weeks. In September, I think we've got about 10 or 12 that will be showing, and some are accessory businesses that don't necessarily do fashion shows. But it's a significant number of businesses that we're able to influence. And I think as quickly as we try and work with established businesses to move to responsible, sustainable practices, it's really important that we're signifying to the next generation coming through that this is the kind of business that you need for the future.
I would actually also like to.
Yes.
No, and I would like to also to actually support Caroline on this one, because I think one of the reasons why this has been so well received in our fashion industry here in Denmark among, not only the brands, but also other stakeholders around Fashion Week, is because we announced this in 2020 and we gave them 3 years. And I think, as Caroline is saying, especially the big brands will need some transition period to work with initiatives that can help improve, their profile or their business practices. So I think it is totally fair to say that, that you can, by 2023, you could start with your talent program and then set another target. It could be 2025 for the rest of the industry, because I think that will be doable. But it's about, it's about hitting that fine line or the balance between, putting out super high ambitions on behalf of the industry, but also making it doable and reachable. Because if it's not doable for the industry, then why would we do it? Because then we're not gonna change anything if we just lose our closest stakeholders.
Well,
I think also
of that, you are 2 fashion weeks in an ecosystem of fashion weeks, right? I mean, there are many there in New York, Milan, Paris, Berlin, Rio. You can go around the world. I mean, isn't this something that you guys need to work together to really format and to make, to sort of create critical mass? And are those discussions that are happening, or is this really a kind of piece by piece basis? Because one of the things, I think one of the biggest hurdles to change always, particularly when we're talking about the fashion system, is the fact that every brand sort of wants to be an island unto itself. Every Fashion Week often acts like an island unto itself. And without real sort of concerted agreement, you can't shift the industry. Caroline, what do you think?
So one of our unofficial principles of our Institute of Positive Fashion is no duplication. If it's happening somewhere else in the world, go talk to them, get the best practice, and look at how you can adapt it for your local market. Which was why when we were first talking to Cecilie, is that it just made sense to take the work that they'd done and the research that they'd done and look at what that would look like from a UK perspective. Similarly, is that the research that we're doing around circularity and the barriers and the infrastructure that's required and investment, is that we'll be sharing that as well, not only with Cecilie, but with other fashion councils, with other businesses as well, to make sure that we're sharing that information as broadly as possible. Is that you cannot underestimate how much our industry needs to change in the next decade. And we've been talking a lot, I think, over the last 10 years about thinking about retail footprint and energy usage and logistics. And this decade, we're really going to have to start to delve into scope 3, into the supply chain, to really think about transparency, to properly engage in terms of innovation and look at how that can change our industry. Otherwise, we really haven't got much of a chance of meeting the Paris Agreement targets. And we all have a responsibility to do that, not just for our industry and future-proofing that, but to do that for the next generation, of course, of talent, of people, and of course for our planet as well. So, is that sense of emergency and the change are incredibly important, because if you leave it too long, is that there's always the opportunity to look at it next year, for it to put it in next year's strategy, is that it has to go into the strategy now so that people are planning for change at this moment in time. I would like to say is that a lot of businesses we talk to are already planning that. And so actually giving them a framework around it, I think, is really going to be, because it allows them to focus and to say, okay, we've reached this standard, what next?
Cecilie, are
And
you
I
in
couldn't,
conversation with other fashion weeks?
yeah, no, yes, yeah, and especially because I couldn't agree more with Caroline that I think we're past that moment where sustainability was like a competitive advantage. We can't, look at sustainability in that way any longer. We're all in the same boat, and as we're all talking about, we're in the middle of a super alarming climate crisis, and for the past few weeks, we've really seen scientists are calling for action, urgent action, yet again, because things need to change. So we are all in for collaborating with other fashion weeks, other fashion organizations, and we are in this phase right now of pursuing partnerships beyond our own organization. So in February, we started our first partnership, which was with the biggest trade fair in Copenhagen that represents 1,500 exhibitors. They'll be introducing the same sustainability standards as well. And then we recently just entered into a partnership with Norway, actually. So going beyond our borders, and the Norwegian fashion industry, which is represented by, or which is spearheaded by the Norwegian Fashion Hub, which is an industry organization, and Oslo Fusion Festival, it's called. It's an arts and fashion festival run by Oslo Runway. And that's a new collaboration, and that's really going to be our first test of how it is to kind of export this system beyond our borders and share it with another market. And I think there's so much potential in it, because what we developed it's not something that we came up with. We have, as Caroline said, done our research. So we are not only inspired by, but we're informed by, other tools and certifications and agendas, everything out there. People in our advisory board are experts from within their fields, covering everything from human rights to materials. So our system is based on the knowledge that's out there, and it's not a local system; it's a global system. So we're super happy to share, and I believe there's so much potential, and I think we won't succeed until we all do this together, because it will drive change.
All right, let me throw a sort of a more radical idea out at you. I mean, why do we have to stick with this twice yearly, or in some cases 4 times, 3 times yearly fashion show schedule? We've just had a year and a half where there were no physical shows. Why are we all swinging back to exactly where it was before? Why aren't we doing 1 physical show a year and 1 digital show a year? I understand that there are municipal pressures, because it's great for the hospitality industries of these different cities. And it's great for, all sorts of fashion adjacent industries. But, if we're really talking about environmental impact and environmental change, doesn't that make more sense? And, has anyone ever broached that idea? Or have you guys have rejected that out of hand? Caroline is part of the main, the big 4. Why not just go down to 1?
Well, I think is that with our framework, there's no pressure for us to the designers to show physically or digitally. Is what we want them to do is to connect with global audiences. And I think if there are any positives, and you have to try and think there surely have been some over the last 18 months, is being able to all of us develop our digital platforms to help our businesses connect with global audiences, not just from viewing films and content, but to being able to buy online, I think already is starting to look at that shift. One of the things that we think about more than anything is how what are the additional layers to the platform of fashion weeks that you can think about really inspiring the industry to think about how fashion weeks might change. And I think that innovation plays a big part of that. So actually, if we can showcase incredible innovation at the heart of fashion weeks, you know, you have the layers of the creativity and fashion shows, you have innovation that really are the challengers and the pioneers in terms of how our industry needs to change, connecting with the designers, letting industry see them, giving them access to that global audience of investment community, retailers, media, to help leverage the scalability of their businesses. And let's really use the platforms that we have to think about how we can accelerate change rather than just think about audiences flying around the world to see collections.
Weren't you part of that group of Fashion Week organizations that signed a letter or made a statement early in the pandemic that was urging brands not to show pre-collections anymore?
We did. Is that we worked. Yeah, we talked. Well, we talked to quite a lot of our counterparts, as you can imagine, throughout the last 18 months, and we've always talked regularly. But yes, ourselves and the CFDA put out a letter to really just think about focusing on creativity. And from our designers' perspective, is that one of the big things I think when they had this moment to stop was the relief almost that they weren't constantly being pushed to create, to travel. And a reminder of why a lot of them had started in the business in the first place, which was to create beautiful collections and have the time to create really thoughtful collections and thoughtful pieces. And so I think we've seen this already, is that the designers have, you know, might be selling a collection, 2 collections a year. They show it at a different time. There are drops throughout the year, but it doesn't mean you need to have 4 shows. You can show a collection, and you know the point of the pre-collection originally was about sort of developing out the basics that all of us want in our wardrobes. And so it was really getting back to thinking is that what is it really as consumers we're wanting to buy? What do we really need to focus on in terms of show? And I think the added layer that we've had, I mean, that was really early on in the pandemic, is, you know, to your point, is that do we really need to show? Is that at what point can we use digital content, and how does that engagement work for me as a brand? I won't name them because I didn't ask whether I could name them or not, but I was talking to a designer yesterday who did an absolutely fantastic fashion film, and their engagement was way beyond a fashion show had ever had. And so now we're starting to get back into physical, is that, you know, they're really considering, do we even need to do a show? You know, to your point, will we do 1 show a year, 1 film a year? Will we just do films, but maybe we do an experience around the film so that people can come and sort of have an opportunity to experience it in a different way? And playing into that part of the creativity is part of the reason why we're all in this industry. You know, the love of the creative mind that creates product collections and worlds that we all, you know, are inspired by and want to live in. But we want them to be responsible now. We don't want this to be frivolous. We don't want this to be mass consumption. You know, so how do we really think about using that creativity to inspire, not just for us to buy and to dream and think about our identity, but to think about the world that we want to live in the future?
Carola, Cecilia, do you think that we are going to a place where you might consider going down to 1 show a year? You know, what's the future of this for you?
I mean, the future for the future is it's of course difficult to foresee or to predict, but I actually sense that there still is a will and a wish to express to be able to showcase and express creatively, you know, the thoughts and all of the creativity behind a particular collection. And we do still have, in most parts of the world, summer and winter. So I actually don't think that there's a disconnect between having 2 shows per year. I don't think we need 4. I don't think that we need both a men's and a women's. I think that we could, or that we can put everything together. We're lucky because we're born as, you know, a mixed fashion week of both men's and women's, and we only have a fashion week going on twice a year. But I feel that recipe resonates with the fashion designers who will still design for winter and for summer. We can then discuss the timing of the drops and everything, which I think has gotten out of hand. And one of the reasons also why we are experiencing like hardcore systemic challenges to in the fashion industry. I think if we make our platforms, I think if we continue to do a good job as fashion weeks, and if it's twice a year, I think, I mean, of course, it's a dichotomy between, that we are, of course, and we have to acknowledge that we are a part of a fashion system that is constantly pushing for newness. And if we don't dare to acknowledge that, then we shouldn't be talking about, transforming the industry or anything. But on the other side, also, I think firmly believing that if we do things right, we can actually change how business is being done, and we can change it for the better. So to me, I don't have the right answer, but I think it's okay to have, 2 great events per year. They can be physical and or digital or one or the other, but I think it's okay to have 2 events per year, as long as the events are really, utilizing and taking, advantage of the influence that we have and the power that we have to spark change.
Okay, so last question for both of you, since I think we're almost out of time. Here I am, fashion journalist. I say, I don't know, 3 years in the future, 5 years in the future, I get on my, I don't know, off my boat, off my carbon neutral plane, and I land in your city to go to your fashion week. Paint me a picture of what would be your kind of ideal, responsible fashion experience in a couple of years. Caroline, go.
Ooh, so you've landed by boat, you've come up the Thames, you've probably had a fashion experience traveling over from New York, so we've made use of your time while you're there. And then when you land in the city, is that for sure is that all of the travel is electric, powered by green energy, at venues that hopefully have adapted to be much more sustainable with green energy air conditioning and recycled air, that the materials that you're seeing are potentially more of them used from upcycled, recycled, new sustainable materials that are drawing on less natural resources from the planet. That those collections are quite focused and limited, so that we're not thinking about mass production or overproduction that leads to waste, that we get to zero waste in terms of our production and our fashion weeks, and that everything can be recycled, and that actually our cities are set up to really support us as an industry and as consumers to be able to do that. But the one thing for sure is that you will have the most incredible creative experience, because that's the reason why you come in the first place.
Yeah. Cecilia, for you, same thing?
I couldn't say it differently. I think Caroline said it beautifully, and I couldn't agree more.
Great. Well, it was lovely talking to both of you. Thanks so much. And fingers crossed, it looks like that.
Let's hope. Vanessa. We'll revisit then.
Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you both.